Not shocking you said that, but this is Phil Kirpin, also syndicated columnist. Ralph Reed, who you've probably been hearing of for years. Great to see him here. They're going to be talking about the IRS. Gentlemen.
Absolutely, yeah. Those of you know, first of all, thank you once again for allowing us here. We're so glad to be here. Totally different presentation from yesterday. Those of you who have been following this know that the IRS, as they were pursuing the groups that we all support, Tea Party and conservative organizations, at some point in time, it was determined that just targeting these Tea Party groups wasn't enough, that they needed to actually codify the criterion that they were using to illegally target these groups. And they decided on this rulemaking. They announced it in the fall. They had a 2-month comment period which just concluded, and we all recognized that it was important to get as much grassroots commenting into the regulatory docket as possible. I wanted to bring before you both today Phil Kirpin and Ralph Reed, both of whom were immensely involved in this effort. Ralph's Faith and Freedom Coalition got tens of thousands of comments in. Phil Kirpin was active in whipping groups to get these comments in, has been speaking very publicly about them. I want Ralph to talk a little bit about the comments that his group generated, how many, how they went about doing it. I want Phil to talk about why this is important, and more to the point, why this fight isn't over yet. That's the most important takeaway today for you guys, is not just the fact that we generated 140,000 comments, and I'll digress for 1 second and say, that was always the goal. Right? I've been working on regulatory issues. I wasn't just a rabble-rouser in my career, but I've been working on regulatory issues for about 20 years in D.C. It's my bread and butter. It's one of my great passions in life. And I know and learned a long time ago that there are 2 ways you go about changing the regulatory process. Those of you know, Congress passes a law, it goes to the agencies for interpretation through the regulatory process. And you file substantive comments, comments that get to the heart of the rule and why it's bad, but you also need to get grassroots comments in. This is what the left has always done very well. It's how weird interpretations of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, OSHA rules, how those things move forward is because they will go out, the Sierra Club will go out, and they will get tens of thousands of postcard comments. So we knew we need to do the same thing with this. I called the IRS because one of the weird things about this rule is not just, obviously you could comment online, but if you submitted paper comments to the IRS, they wanted 9 copies. And one of the scenarios that I envisioned was the inability to get comments directly in the way that I like to do it. So I was envisioning having to go and collect paper copies of comments from people, or at least getting comments in and printing them out and delivering them. And I simply did not want to print out 900,000 pages of documents. So I called the IRS and asked them if they really wanted 9 copies, and they said, well, why? How many comments do you think you're going to get in? Because the IRS on their rules tend to get 500 comments in, maybe 1,000 on something that's important. I said, well, I'm expecting probably over 100,000 comments, and there was an audible silence on the phone. And the lady said in a moment of candor, we can't handle the 7,000 comments we have in right now. They have 140,000 comments in, largely due to the work of, I won't dive into my own horn, but largely the work of Ralph and Phil. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ralph to talk about why their group, why Faith and Freedom found it important, how they went about doing it, and then we'll turn it over to Phil.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much, and I want to give, Andrew will not toot his horn as much as I will, because he's known far and wide as a very humble guy.
A loud humble guy. Thank you.
But Andrew and I had an early strategy call on this, and really it was as a result of that call that he explained a lot of things to me about how this process would work. He has a lot more experience than I do, or than Faith and Freedom does, in filing comments with a regulatory agency. And the playbook and the roadmap that he provided to Faith and Freedom Coalition was critical in our success, so I want to give credit where credit is due there. I also want to thank Phil. Phil is somebody that I have worked with very closely over many years on a lot of free market issues. I think he's one of the smartest and capable tacticians and strategists in the policy community in Washington, and Phil, it was an honor to work with you as well on this. We have at Faith and Freedom Coalition, it's a moving target, but right now it's around 800,000 members, donors, activists, and supporters in our organization. The reason why it's a moving target is because right now we're adding about 1,000 new members every single business day. And I want to give credit where credit belongs for that, and I want to thank Barack Obama for making that possible. Because if it weren't for him, that wouldn't be the case. The week of the full thrust of our IRS campaign, we added over 18,500 members in 1 week.
Wow.
Now, the way we did this was, we obviously have snail mail addresses on every one of those 800,000 people, but we only had email addresses on about 200,000 of them. So we emailed them, and we emailed them multiple times. We also organized a conference call with Congressman Dave Camp, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and Congressman Camp did an outstanding job of both educating our leaders. We have over 400 local chapters. We have state affiliates in 32 states. We had not all of those people on that conference call, but a lot of them. And he was marking up, I believe, the next day, the legislation that would block these regulations. Now, before I talk about how we went about it, let me tell you why we feel so strongly about this. We feel strongly about this because we think that one of the things that separates the United States from every other nation in recorded human history until the time of our founding, and one of the things that makes us unique and exceptional, and it's the reason why people are willing to crawl across broken glass and brave oceans at the risk of their own lives to become Americans, is because we believe that the government derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. And if you don't think that that is different than what goes on in the rest of the world, just look at what's going on in Syria, where there's 140,000 innocents who've been slaughtered recently. Look at what's going on in the Ukraine and Crimea. Look at what's happening in Egypt, in Iran, and I could go on. What happens here is not normal. It is not the normative human experience. Now, the right to organize, to mobilize, to educate, to register people to vote, to ensure that they're properly activated and that they have an effective means of petitioning their elected officials is critical to the success of this democratic experiment. And so we really believe that these regulations in their current form, which outlaw in blackout periods prior to primaries and elections, the ability to distribute a nonpartisan voter guide, the ability to conduct a voter registration drive in a church, which is important to our organization, the ability to even post the voting record of an incumbent elected official or legislator on a website in the 60 and 30-day blackout periods before primaries and general elections. Now, if you think this doesn't matter, I want you to think about when the vote took place in the U.S. Senate on authorizing military action in Iraq, which was arguably the most important vote that the members of the Senate at that time cast in their careers. Anybody remember when that vote took place? October 9th, 2002. Less than 30 days before the 2002 elections. Wow. So if these regulations had been in effect, social welfare and 501c4 organizations would have been prohibited from sending out an advertisement, an email blast, or an alert on their website urging their members to contact elected officials who coincidentally happened to be a candidate for re-election at that time. So we consider this to be an infringement not just on our right to vote and organize and be educated in that respect, but also to influence legislation. We think it is an existential threat to the survival of citizenship as we have known it in this country and as our founders intended it to be. So what we did was, in addition to our roughly 800,000 members and supporters, we also sent out emails to about 4 million of our close personal friends, and we asked them to file comments with the IRS. Now the problem is that if we asked them to go to the IRS website themselves and type in the comments, or cut and paste the comments, we would dramatically lower our response rate or our transition rate from saying, yes, I want to do it, to actually filing the comments. So what we did instead was we created literally hundreds of individualized comments that, based on an algorithm of which list we were hitting, would comport most with their interest in the issue. And all they had to do was authorize us to do so, give us their name, their email, and their cell phone number. That's all I wanted. Just their name, email, and cell phone number. And then we would file the comment on their behalf. And we had 5 servers that individually filed these comments. In the final 2 days, we were filing an average of 20,000 comments a day. And we filed over 61,630 total comments. And what we want to do is, having learned from this, talking to Andrew and then some of our outside consultant team, we think we could have the ability, now that we see how it's done, to file literally hundreds of thousands of comments with a regulatory agency. I don't know if...
Let me just interject here.
Are you offering this as a vendor?
No, I'm not offering this as a vendor, but I can put people in touch with people. I can put people in touch with who help.
My dream has always been, and part and parcel of why I took over the Institute for Liberty, is to slow down the wheels of the bureaucracy, bury them under an avalanche of comments that we can now do. Because if you file a comment and it is substantive in nature, they have to respond. And more to the point, we break it down by congressional district. It's something we can use to go up to Capitol Hill. So when you're dealing with, Nancy Pelosi, or I'll use my own congressman, Andy Harris. That way I know how many comments came from Andy Harris's district. It's a tool that you can use to go and put pressure on these guys. If you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to Phil and talk a little bit more about what they did.